If you're just tuning in, this is the latest that's coming in on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. A bulk of Russian ground forces still more than 30 kilometers north of the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. But the capital remains under the control of Ukraine, as per the latest. A two-day curfew in the city has been lifted, with citizens now moving around. The Ukrainian delegation has arrived in Belarus for peace talks with Russia, with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky not a part of the delegation. The city of Chernihiv in the northeast has faced heavy shelling from Russian troops overnight, but remains in Ukrainian hands. President Zelensky has appealed to the European Union to immediately admit Ukraine as a member under a new special procedure. The UN Human Rights Chief says that at least 102 civilians, including 7 children, had been killed in Ukraine, warning that the actual numbers were likely far higher. Meanwhile, Moscow's central bank is racing against time to contain the impact of the Western sanctions on the Russian economy by hiking the interest rates and banning brokers from selling securities held by the foreigners. Today is the 5th day of the Russian assault against Ukraine. And the Ukrainian military has said that Russian troops had slowed down the pace of the offensive. Let's first get you up to speed with the top developments. Russia and Ukraine will be holding talks at the Gomel region shortly. The composition of the Ukrainian delegation at the talks in Belarus not disclosed as of now, but reported to be rather high level, quote unquote. The Russian delegation has confirmed that Russia is interested in finding a way to agreement with the Ukrainian delegation as soon as possible. The Ukraine President's office says its main goal of talks with Russia is immediate ceasefire and withdrawal of the Russian troops. Although earlier the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had said that he did not believe in the outcome of the meeting, Belarus said that the venue for the talks is now prepared.
Скажу відверто, як завжди, я не дуже вірю в результат цієї зустрічі, але нехай спробують. Щоб потім у жодного громадянина України не було жодного сумніву, що я, як президент, не намагався зупинити війну, коли був нехай і маленький, але все ж таки шанс.
According to reports, Russia's defense ministry says its forces have taken control of the Ukrainian cities of Verdyansk and Anahadar, and Russian troops have also taken over an area around Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. The Russian army saying civilians can leave freely from the capital if they wish to do so, adding that Ukrainians are using civilians as human shields and also claiming air superiority in Ukraine. Reports saying Russia has lost around 5,300 troops since the invasion began. A blanket curfew that had been imposed in Kyiv for the past 3 days has now been lifted, allowing students to move westward through trains. Blasts were reportedly heard in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv in the early hours of the 5th day of the Russian attack. Let's go straight across now to our correspondent Rosie Bichard, who's joining us from Brussels for more on this. What are the expectations at this point in Brussels, Rosie, from these talks that are going to be held between Russia and Ukraine?
Well, Molly, I think it's a case of very high stakes and low expectations, and those low expectations probably stemming from the results of those diplomatic talks held between EU leaders and NATO allies and Russia in the run-up to this crisis, which has now, of course, escalated into a war. We heard last week from French President Emmanuel Macron when he was in Brussels. He spoke about Russia being duplicitous in those talks, in those talks between the EU leaders and Russia. So at this stage, we're not having very high expectations here in Brussels. That's at least the sense. However, the EU has, of course, said that, as it has always done, it favours a diplomatic path forward. But in a kind of show of how seriously the European Union is taking this, Brussels yesterday announced it is providing Ukraine with lethal weapons, and that is unprecedented within the European Union and its history in terms of its defence policy. It was described by the bloc as a watershed moment, so that gives you an indication of where they think this might be heading. But of course, all eyes in Brussels among officials and leaders today will be watching those talks and hoping for a positive outcome.
Indeed. Let's talk about the sanctions that have already been announced, the impact of which is already visible. If you can take us through the assessment in Brussels of how the Russian economy is reacting to those measures.
Well, it has to be said that this package of sanctions from the European Union is also unprecedented. We've seen now 3 packages of sanctions from Brussels in just a couple of days. So it started off with some measures against individuals, including the Russian defense minister. Then it escalated to individuals, including Russian President Vladimir Putin. And what is now coming up today is agreement among EU member states on cutting certain Russian banks off from the SWIFT international payment system. Beyond that, we are also expecting some measures to ban the broadcaster RT, that's Russia Today, from broadcasting within the European Union. The idea behind this from the European Union side was to really, as they say, cripple Russia's ability to finance this war. That is what they're hoping for. We are now waiting to see how that moves forward, but here in Brussels officials are certainly pinning their hopes that these sanctions will deliver the results that they expect. However, we have had some questions raised, at least in the past, of what they can do if the sanctions don't work. And I think we had a response to that yesterday night when we had this announcement about the EU sending this lethal weapons to Ukraine. So that seems to be the next step on where things are going from the Brussels side. It must be said that EU defence ministers are convening today virtually to discuss the details of how they will actually deliver that aid and deliver those weapons. And of course, there are questions about the safety of delivering it across a border when there are Russian troops there. So they will be discussing that in the coming hours, and we will wait to see how they plan to actually roll this out.
Right, and we will keep coming back to you for those updates as and when they trickle in. Rosie Burchard getting us those inputs from Brussels. Thanks very much for now. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.